He thought he had everything, until he saw his own daughter take her first step, without him. And a single video was enough to make him rush back to the life he was about to lose. If you enjoy stories like this, be sure to subscribe to this channel. We post daily. Continuing. The March dawn stretched silently across the penthouse in Kensington Gardens, where only the intermittent sobs of a baby cut through the quiet of the London night. Isabella Matthews walked barefoot down the marble hallway, her feet already calloused from so many nights like this, cradling Sophie in her arms while contemplating the city that never slept through the tempered glass windows. Her green eyes, once bright and confident, like those of a prosecutor who had never lost a case, now carried the exhaustion of someone who had learned to be two people in one. The deep dark circles under her eyes betrayed the sleepless nights, her brown hair tied in a messy bun, her cotton nightgown stained with breast milk, a version of herself she had never imagined knowing. The 500-square-meter apartment seemed to echo a solitude that all that luxury couldn't disguise. The exposed, concrete walls, the furniture signed by renowned designers, the contemporary artworks, all hand-picked by Leonard during the first years of their marriage, when he still pretended to care about details that didn't involve spreadsheets and million-pound contracts. Sophie squirmed in her mother's arms, her little blue eyes, just like her father's, wide in the dim light. She was just over a year old, and already showed the strong personality she had inherited from both sides. Isabella sighed, adjusting her daughter closer against her chest, feeling the familiar weight of guilt that had haunted her since the girl's birth. Leonard Anderson Carter had left exactly 3 months and 5 days ago. Isabella knew the exact date because she had marked it in red on the calendar, not out of longing, but out of anger. It was on a rainy Tuesday, after yet another night, when Sophie had cried non-stop because of her first teeth. He had woken up irritated, complaining that he had an important meeting in the morning and that he couldn't take that noise anymore. "I need a few weeks to sort out some business in Edinburgh," he had said, throwing expensive suits into his Louis Vuitton suitcase. "The company is expanding into the oil sector. When I return, perhaps things will be calmer around here." Isabella remembered sitting in the nursing armchair, Sophie finally asleep in her arms, and watching her husband pack as if watching a movie. There was something unreal about that moment. The man who had promised to be a partner in raising their daughter was literally fleeing from responsibility. "And when would this, when I return, be?" she had asked, her voice as cold as the marble kitchen countertops. "A few weeks, a month at most." But 1 month turned into 2, 2 turned into 3, and the sporadic calls dwindled until they became automatic. "How are you all doing?" Messages sent always on weekends, as if it were an administrative obligation in his busy schedule. At first, Isabella had tried to maintain her old routine. She would wake up at 5 in the morning, breastfeed Sophie, get ready for work at the Crown Prosecution Service, leave her daughter with Martha, the nanny who had worked with them since their marriage, and dive into the criminal cases that had always been her passion. She would return at 7 in the evening, eat dinner alone while Sophie played in her high chair, bathe her daughter, put her to sleep, and try to make a few calls to Leonard, who rarely answered. But the routine began to crumble when Martha had to step away to care for her own sick mother. Isabella found herself alone, trying to reconcile the career she had built with such effort with full-time motherhood. That's when she discovered that being a single mother wasn't a romantic choice. It was a daily struggle against exhaustion, loneliness, and the constant feeling that she was failing at everything. She then decided to completely restructure her life. She negotiated with the chief prosecutor to work from home 3 days a week and let Martha go, not because she wanted to, but because she needed to learn to do everything herself, to no longer depend on anyone. She bought cookbooks, watched dozens of YouTube videos on child development, and transformed her office into a multifunctional space where she could work while Sophie played. The first few weeks were chaos. She burned more food than she managed to cook. Sophie cried for hours while she tried to participate in important video conferences, and there were nights when she collapsed in the bathroom crying from exhaustion and wondering how other women managed to do it alone. But little by little, something extraordinary happened. Isabella discovered a strength she didn't know she possessed. She learned to make vegetable purees that Sophie devoured, memorized lullabies that instantly calmed her daughter, and developed a maternal intuition that surprised her every day. And most importantly, she learned to be proud of the woman she was becoming. Her colleagues noticed the change. Isabella remained brilliant in her legal arguments, but there was a new determination in her demeanor, a strength that came from having faced her own limits and overcome them. She was no longer just the impeccable prosecutor. She was a warrior fighting on multiple fronts simultaneously. Her friends tried to convince her to go out, to have fun, to live a little. But Isabella had discovered a different joy in the small daily triumphs. Sophie eating by herself for the first time, sleeping through the night, smiling when she saw her reflection in the mirror. These were intimate, silent victories that were worth more than any professional success. On a Tuesday evening, as she finished reviewing the records of a complex corruption case, Isabella heard strange noises coming from Sophie's room. It was almost 11 o'clock, and the girl should have been asleep long ago. Concerned, she went to check and found a scene that made her heart race. Sophie was standing in her crib, holding onto the bars with her chubby little hands, swaying her body from side to side. When she saw her mother, she smiled in that way that made Isabella's world stop, and tried to take a step towards the side of the crib. "My goodness, Sophie," Isabella whispered, approaching slowly so as not to startle her daughter. "Are you trying to walk?" The girl babbled incomprehensible sounds, but it was clear she was preparing for her first steps. Isabella felt a mix of euphoria and melancholy. This was one of the most special moments in any child's life, and Leonard wasn't there to witness it. Throughout her pregnancy, they had talked about these milestones. Leonard used to say he wanted to be the first to see Sophie walk, that he would buy the most expensive camera on the market to record every second. Now he was in some five-star hotel in Edinburgh, probably closing deals that would bring in a few more million, completely oblivious to the fact that he was missing his own daughter's childhood. Isabella sat on the bedroom floor, extending her arms to Sophie. "Come, my love. Come to Mummy." Sophie hesitated, holding firmly onto the bars, but her mother's smile encouraged her. She let go of one hand, then the other, tried to take a step, stumbled, but managed to balance herself again. She tried once more, and this time managed to take 2 small steps before clinging back to the crib. "You did it," Isabella shouted, not caring if she woke the neighbors. "You walked, my princess, you walked." Sophie laughed, clapping her hands, as if she understood the importance of the moment. Isabella picked her up, covering her daughter's face with kisses, feeling such intense emotion that she had to sit in the armchair to keep from collapsing. It was at that moment that reality hit her like a punch to the stomach. Leonard was losing everything. He wasn't there to see her first steps. He hadn't been there for her first words, for the first tooth that emerged. For the first time, Sophie slept through the night. He was choosing to lose all of this for what? For more money? For deals he probably wouldn't even remember in 10 years. Without thinking of the consequences, Isabella grabbed her phone and opened the camera. She put Sophie back on the floor, stepped back a few paces and started filming. Sophie, excited by her mother's attention, repeated the feat. She let go of her support and took 4 shaky steps towards Isabella before falling onto her bottom, laughing. "Look what you did, Sophie," Isabella said to the camera, her voice choked with emotion. "Mummy's first steps. You're the bravest girl in the world." The video lasted only 43 seconds, but it captured a moment that would never be repeated. Isabella looked at the screen, seeing Sophie smiling, trying to walk, pure joy and innocence. And unable to control herself, she typed a message to the number she still had saved as "Love of my life," a name that now sounded like irony. She took her first steps. "I thought you'd like to see." She sent the video before reason could stop her. On the other side of the city, at the Wolseley restaurant, Leonard Carter was finishing signing a contract that would guarantee his engineering firm participation in an oil exploration project set to yield over £50 million in the next 2 years. The BP executives had just left, leaving him alone with a £2,000 bottle of French wine and the satisfaction of having closed the biggest deal of his career. At 38, Leonard had built an empire that began with a small consulting firm inherited from his father and had transformed into one of the largest engineering and infrastructure companies in the UK. He had offices in 5 counties, over 200 employees, and had just secured a financial future that his next 3 generations wouldn't be able to spend. But as he toasted alone, looking at the panoramic view of the Firth of Forth through the restaurant windows, Leonard felt an emptiness that no contract could fill. For months he hadn't been able to sleep properly. For months he had avoided any thoughts about London, about the penthouse in Kensington Gardens, about Isabella and Sophie. The truth was he had run away from the responsibility of being a father, run away from the nightly cries, run away from the feeling of inadequacy that seized him whenever he tried to calm Sophie, and she only stopped crying in Isabella's arms. Run away from the guilt of seeing the woman he loved transform into someone he didn't recognize, tired, entirely dedicated to their daughter with no time for him. Before Sophie was born, they were a perfect couple. Dinners at sophisticated restaurants, trips to paradise destinations, nights of intense sex after art exhibition openings or theatre premieres. Isabella was the most sought-after prosecutor in London, he the rapidly rising entrepreneur. They were beautiful, successful, envied by all the couples in their social circle. But the pregnancy changed everything. Isabella developed a connection with Sophie that he could never understand. Ever since the girl was born, it seemed there was only room for the 2 of them in that apartment. He felt like an intruder, a stranger trying to participate in a relationship that didn't need him to exist. And then came the opportunity to expand the business to Edinburgh. It was the perfect excuse to get away, to breathe, to feel competent again at something. In recent months he had kept himself busy enough not to think about the family he had left behind. He woke early, worked late, went out with clients and slept exhausted in expensive hotels. It was a simpler life, without emotional responsibilities, without inexplicable cries, without the constant pressure of being a father who didn't know how to be. But when his phone vibrated on the restaurant table and he saw Isabella's name on the screen, something in his chest tightened. It had been over 2 weeks since they had spoken, and their last message exchanges had been cold, formal. "Sophie is fine. All quiet here. When are you coming back?" "Soon." The video loaded slowly on the restaurant's connection. Leonard adjusted the phone's volume, thinking it would just be another recording of Sophie playing, as Isabella used to send in the first few months. But what he saw completely paralyzed him. Sophie, his daughter, the girl he had left crawling 3 months ago, was standing alone, smiling at the camera, taking shaky but determined steps towards her mother. She had grown, her hair was longer, her face more defined, and there was a personality there he didn't recognize. And Isabella's voice in the background, choked with emotion and pride, calling Sophie the bravest girl in the world. Leonard watched the video 5 times in a row, each repetition a punch to the gut. His daughter had taken her first steps, and he wasn't there. He was sitting in an expensive restaurant, celebrating a contract that meant nothing compared to that moment he had lost forever. For the first time in months, Leonard allowed himself to feel the truth he had been running from. He loved Sophie, he loved Isabella, and he was throwing everything away out of fear of not being a good enough father, out of cowardice. To face a new version of himself, he didn't yet know. He picked up his phone and dialed his assistant in London. "Carla, cancel everything I have tomorrow. I'm flying back tonight." The flight back to London was the longest of Leonard's life. 3 hours that felt like 3 days, as he watched Sophie's video repeatedly, each viewing intensifying the urgency he felt to rush home. He had cancelled important meetings, angered partners, but for the first time in months, he could see his priorities clearly. It was almost 2 in the morning when the taxi pulled up in front of the building. Leonard looked at the penthouse windows, all dark, and felt a pang of anxiety. What if Isabella didn't want to talk? What if Sophie really didn't remember him? 3 months was a long time in the life of a 1-year-old child. He went up in the private elevator with trembling hands, something that didn't happen even in the tensest negotiations. When the door opened directly into the apartment's living room, he was hit by a wave of details that made him stop at the threshold. The ambience was completely different. The glass coffee table where they used to rest architecture magazines and expensive wine glasses was now covered with colorful toys. A children's playmate occupied the center of the room, and there were drawings stuck to the stainless steel refrigerator. The smell in the air was also different. No longer Isabella's expensive perfume or the aroma of imported candles she loved, but something more homely, more welcoming, the smell of home-cooked food, of baby powder, of life truly being lived. Leonard left his suitcase in the entrance hall and walked silently through the apartment. He passed the kitchen and saw a baby bottle drying on the rack, small puree jars organized on the counter, a high chair that wasn't there when he left. Each item was evidence of how life had gone on without him, of how Isabella had adapted and created a new routine that didn't include his presence. He reached Sophie's bedroom door and hesitated before turning the doorknob. The girl was sleeping soundly, lying on her stomach in the crib, her blonde hair spread on the pillow. She had visibly grown. She was no longer the baby he had left behind, but a child beginning to show her own personality. "She's bigger," a voice whispered behind him. Leonard turned and saw Isabella standing at the door of the master bedroom, wearing a simple cotton nightgown he had never seen. She was thinner, her hair longer, and there was a firmness in her posture that completely disarmed him. She was no longer the woman he had left 3 months ago, weakened by recent motherhood. She was someone else, someone who had found a strength he didn't recognize. "Isa," he began, but she raised her hand, asking for silence. "Let's talk in the living room. I don't want to wake her." They went to the balcony, where Isabella sat in one of the armchairs with an upright, formal posture, as if in a courtroom hearing. Leonard tried to sit beside her, but Isabella indicated the armchair opposite. The physical distance was a clear sign of where he stood in that relationship. "Why did you come back?" she asked, without beating around the bush. Her voice was cold, controlled, very different from the emotional woman who had sent the video hours earlier. "The video, Sophie walking, I realized that you were losing something important," she finished, with a tone that mixed irony and pain. "How interesting. It took your daughter's first steps for you to remember you have a family." Leonard leaned forward, trying to touch her hand, but Isabella pulled away. "Isa, I know I made a mistake. I know I was a coward. But I'm here now, ready to be the father and husband you both deserve." "Now," she repeated, and for the first time in the conversation, her voice trembled slightly. "Leonard, Sophie had a 40-degree fever 2 weeks ago. I spent the entire night at the London clinic alone, with her convulsing in my arms. The nurse asked me where her father was, and I had to lie and say you were traveling for work, as if it were normal for a father not to be present in such an emergency." Leonard felt his stomach clench. "Why didn't you call me? I would have come back immediately." "Call for what?" Isabella stood up and began pacing the balcony, as she did when she was nervous in court. "For you to tell me you were in an important meeting. For you to make me feel like I was a nagging wife, disrupting her successful husband's business." "I never said that, Ed." "You didn't need to say it, Leonard. Your actions spoke for you. You simply decided that fatherhood was too inconvenient to fit into your schedule." She stopped in front of him, her green eyes shining with a mixture of anger and pain he had never seen. "Do you know what I learned in these 3 months? I learned that I don't need you. I learned to replace the shower valve when Sophie broke it. I learned to cook dishes she likes. I learned to cope with sleepless nights. I learned that I am much stronger than I imagined." "I know. You're strong, Isa. I always knew. But that doesn't mean you have to do everything alone." "But that's what you don't understand." She sat down again, this time closer, but still with a rigid posture. "I'm already doing everything alone, for months. You are not missed at all in our routine, Leonard. Sophie doesn't ask for you, doesn't cry when she misses you, doesn't find your absence strange. To her, you're a stranger who appears occasionally." The words hit Leonard like slaps. He tried to argue, but Isabella continued. "And do you know what's worse? Sophie is an incredible child. She laughs all the time. She's starting to babble words. She has a strong yet sweet personality. She waited for you, Leonard. In the first few weeks, she would look at the door when she heard a noise, as if expecting you to walk in. But little by little, she stopped waiting, and so did I. Isa, please give me a chance to explain." Explain what? That your company is more important than your daughter, that you needed to find yourself away from the responsibility of being a father, that all of this was just a bad phase that has passed? Leonard stood up, frustrated. It wasn't like that. I was confused, scared. I didn't know how to be a father, how to divide my attention between the company and my family. I thought if I just stepped away for a bit. You thought it would be easier to run away, Isabella interrupted him. And it really was, wasn't it? Easier for you. But not for me. Not for Sophie. They fell silent for a few minutes, the weight of the conversation hanging between them like a dense cloud. Leonard looked at his hands, trying to find words that could undo 3 months of abandonment. Isabella watched the city below, the car lights tracing luminous lines on the busy avenues. "I love you both," Leonard finally said, his voice almost a whisper. "I know," Isabella replied, still looking at the city. "But love isn't enough, Leonard. Love without presence, without commitment, without responsibility is just a pretty word." She turned to him, and Leonard saw tears in her eyes for the first time in their conversation. "Do you know what hurts me most? It's that I still love you, and I hate feeling this way. I hate that a part of me is happy you're here because it means I'm weaker than I thought. You're not weak. You're the strongest woman I know. Strong enough to make a decision I should have made months ago," she said, getting up and walking to the coffee table. She picked up a folder Leonard hadn't noticed before. "I saw a solicitor last week. The papers are ready." Leonard felt the world spin. "Papers?" "Divorce papers, Leonard. I'm filing for divorce." The words dropped between them like a bomb. Leonard was paralyzed, trying to process what he had just heard. "Isa, no. Can't we talk about this? Can't we try to work it out?" "Work out what?" 3 months of abandonment. The feeling of having been deceived for years about who I thought you were. The certainty that I can't count on you in difficult times. Isabella opened the folder and showed him the documents. "I'm not asking for anything more than what belongs to me. I want full custody of Sophie, with regulated visitation rights for you. I don't want alimony. I don't want anything from the company. I just want to separate from someone who disappoints me every day." "But I came back. I'm here. You came back because you saw a cute video of your daughter walking. What if she hadn't walked yet? What if I hadn't sent the video? How much longer would you have stayed in Edinburgh, Leonard? Another 3 months? 6? A year?" Leonard didn't know how to answer because the truth was he didn't know. Maybe he would have stayed. Maybe he would only have come back when the business in Edinburgh was consolidated, when he felt ready to be a father, when fatherhood fit better into his schedule. "That's what I thought," Isabella said, seeing his silence. "You come back when it's convenient for you, not when your family needs you." She closed the folder and placed it back on the table. "You can stay in the guest room tonight. Tomorrow we'll talk about how we'll arrange visits. Sophie needs to get to know you better before you become a regular presence in her life. Isabella, please." "I'm tired, Leonard. Tired of waiting for you. Tired of playing the role of both mother and father. Tired of making excuses for your absence. I want to sleep." She walked towards the bedroom but stopped at the door. "Oh, and Leonard, Sophie wakes up at 6 in the morning. If you really want to be part of her life, you'll have to get used to the routine of a 1-year-old. It's not like closing a deal. It's every day, every hour, even when you don't feel like it." Leonard was left alone on the balcony, looking at the divorce papers on the table. 3 months ago, he had a family. Now he had a thriving company and 2 documents that formalized the end of an 8-year marriage. He picked up the papers and tried to read, but the letters seemed to dance before his eyes. Full custody for the mother, regulated visitation for the father, division of assets, dissolution of the conjugal partnership. All so cold, so legal, so different from the love he still felt for Isabella and Sophie. But at the same time he understood that Isabella was right. He had abandoned his family when they needed him most. He had chosen the ease of business over the difficulty of fatherhood. He had fled like a coward, and now he was paying the price. He walked to the guest room, a space that used to be used for occasional visits, and that would now be his new reality. The bed was made with clean sheets. There were folded towels on the dresser, and on the bedside table, an old photo of him and Isabella on their honeymoon in Provence. They were so young, so happy, so convinced that love would be enough to overcome any obstacle. Leonard sat on the edge of the bed, and for the first time in months, cried. He cried for the first steps he missed, for the sleepless nights Isabella faced alone, for Sophie's fever that he didn't even know happened. He cried for the man he had become and for the family he had destroyed out of cowardice. From the next room, he could hear Sophie waking for her midnight feed. He heard Isabella get up, whisper loving words to soothe her daughter, and then silence returned. It was a routine that had happened every night for over a year, and he had missed all of them. At 6 in the morning, sharp, as Isabella had warned, Sophie woke up. Leonard heard his daughter's cry and hesitated. Should he go help? Would Isabella welcome him? Or would it be another intrusion into a routine that worked perfectly without him? He decided to go. He found Isabella in Sophie's room, changing the girl's nappy with an efficiency that showed months of practice. Sophie was awake, observing everything with curiosity, and when she saw Leonard standing at the door, her little face closed into an expression of unfamiliarity. "She doesn't recognize me," Leonard murmured. "What did you expect?" Isabella asked, without looking at him, finishing dressing Sophie. "To her you're a stranger." Leonard approached slowly, trying to smile at his daughter. "Hi, Sophie. Daddy's here." Sophie looked at him with suspicion, and then stretched her little arms out to Isabella, asking to be picked up. It was a simple gesture, but it cut Leonard more than any words Isabella could have said. "She needs to have breakfast," Isabella said, picking up Sophie. "You can help if you want, but don't get frustrated if she doesn't react well to your presence. It will take time." In the kitchen, Leonard watched Isabella prepare Sophie's fruit puree with a precision that revealed months of trial and error. She knew exactly the consistency her daughter preferred, the ideal temperature, the flavors Sophie liked best. It was intimate knowledge, built day after day, that he would never have. "Can I try to feed her the puree?" he asked. Isabella hesitated, but agreed. "She usually makes a mess, and don't insist if she doesn't want it." Leonard sat in front of the high chair, spoon in hand, trying to remember if he had ever fed Sophie. Probably not. He brought the spoon to the girl's mouth, who immediately closed her lips and turned her face away. "Sophie, it's Daddy. Remember Daddy?" Sophie began to whimper, and Isabella immediately took the spoon back. "I'd better do it." "She's nervous?" Leonard watched Sophie eat calmly from Isabella's hand, smiling and playing with her food. To his own daughter, he was an intruder. To the woman he loved, he was a disappointment. And for the first time in his life, Leonard understood what it meant to have lost everything that truly mattered. After breakfast, while Isabella was bathing Sophie, Leonard tried once more. "Isa, I know I made unforgivable mistakes, but give me a chance to prove I can change." "Change how?" "Will you cancel meetings to take Sophie to the pediatrician? Will you wake up in the middle of the night when she's sick? Will you participate in decisions about her education, about her food, about everything involved in raising a child?" "Yes," he answered without hesitation. "For how long, Leonard?" "Until the next business opportunity arises." "Until you get tired of the routine again." Leonard had no answer for that because he didn't know. He couldn't promise something he wasn't sure he could fulfill, and Isabella, reading his silence, just shook her head. "That's exactly why I'm filing for divorce, because you yourself aren't sure of what you're promising." That morning, Leonard saw his family from a perspective he had never had before. He saw Sophie playing on the living room floor, free and happy, needing him for nothing. He saw Isabella working on her laptop while keeping an eye on her daughter, multitasking in a way he never could. He saw an organized, functional, complete life that had learned to exist without his presence, and he understood that coming back wouldn't be enough, that love wouldn't be enough, that he would need to completely rebuild who he was to have any chance of recovering what he had lost. But he also understood that it might already be too late. Leonard spent the following week desperately trying to reclaim his place in Sophie and Isabella's lives. He cancelled all meetings in London, transferred responsibilities to partners, and for the first time in years, put family before business. He woke up at 6 in the morning to help with Sophie, tried to participate in all his daughter's activities, and gradually began to understand the complexity of being a full-time father. Sophie reacted to his presence with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. Sometimes she accepted him picking her up, other times she cried and asked for her mother. It was a slow and painful process, but Leonard persisted. He bought books on child development, learned to make the purees Sophie liked, and discovered there was an entire world in fatherhood he had never explored. Isabella observed everything with careful detachment. She was polite, allowed him to participate in Sophie's routine, but maintained an invisible barrier between them. There were no more intimate conversations, no more casual touches, nothing that reminded them of the couple they once were. It was like living with a courteous stranger who happened to be his daughter's mother. One Thursday afternoon, while Sophie slept and Isabella worked in her makeshift office in the living room, Leonard tried a different approach. He had prepared dinner, a simple pasta dish he learned from watching YouTube videos, and bought a bottle of the French wine she adored. "Isa, can we have dinner together tonight? Without talking about divorce, without discussing the past, just like a normal family." She looked at him over the laptop screen, and for a moment, Leonard saw hesitation in her eyes. Perhaps she also missed the connection they once had. Perhaps she also wanted to believe that it was still possible to rebuild something. "All right," she agreed, closing her laptop, "but just for tonight." The dinner started tense but gradually became more natural. Leonard told stories about the deals he had closed in Edinburgh, but this time focusing on the funny aspects, the eccentric clients, the unusual situations. Isabella laughed a few times, a sound he hadn't heard in months, and that warmed his chest. She talked about her work, about a complex corruption case she was investigating, about how she had managed to prove the innocence of a defendant everyone considered guilty. Leonard had always admired her passion for justice, the way she could see nuances where others saw only black and white. For a moment, it seemed they were returning to their old selves. Leonard poured more wine, Isabella relaxed in her chair, and the conversation flowed as it used to, until his phone rang. St. Thomas's Hospital appeared on the screen. Leonard frowned, not recognizing the number. "Answer it," Isabella said. "It might be important." "Hello? Mr. Leonard Carter. This is the emergency department at St. Thomas's Hospital. Mrs. Camilla Scott gave your name as an emergency contact. She was in a car accident and is asking to see you." Leonard felt his blood run cold. Camilla. He hadn't heard that name in 5 years, since she had simply disappeared from his life without explanation. What was she doing in London? And why had she listed him as an emergency contact? All right. I'll be right there," he managed to say, hanging up the phone with trembling hands. "Who was that?" Isabella asked, immediately noticing the change in his expression. An old acquaintance. She was in an accident. I need to go to the hospital." What kind of old acquaintance? Leonard hesitated. How to explain Camilla? How to talk about a relationship that had happened during a break in his courtship with Isabella more than 5 years ago? How to talk about a woman who had simply vanished from his life without a trace? "It's complicated," he murmured, getting up from the table. "Leonard," Isabella said, her voice regaining that cold tone he had learned to fear. "Who is Camilla?" There was no escape. "A woman I was involved with a few years ago, when we took that break in our relationship, remember? Before we got engaged." Isabella remembered it had been a difficult period when they had decided they needed to think about their relationship and were separated for 4 months. She had thought Leonard had been alone during that time, as she had been. "I'm coming with you," she said, getting up as well. "No, Isa, it's not necessary." "Leonard, an ex of yours lists me as an emergency contact after 5 years, and you think I won't want to understand what's going on?" At the hospital, they walked in silence through the corridors that smelled of disinfectant. Leonard felt a knot in his stomach growing with each step. Why had Camilla appeared now? Why? Precisely when he was trying to rebuild his family. The nurse led them to room 405. Camilla was lying in bed, her face bruised but conscious. When she saw Leonard, her eyes filled with tears. Leo, she whispered. You came. Camilla, my God, what happened? What are you doing in London? I need to talk to you. It's about Gabriel. Gabriel. Camilla looked at Isabella, standing at the door with an indecipherable expression, and hesitated. Perhaps it's better if we talk alone. No, Isabella said, entering the room. If it's something that involves my husband, I have the right to know. Leonard felt his stomach sink as he saw Camilla's gaze move between him and Isabella. There was something in her eyes, an urgency mixed with fear, that made him sure his life was about to completely fall apart. Gabriel is your son, Leo, Camilla said, the words coming out in a breath. Our son. He's 4 years old. The silence that followed was deafening. Leonard felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. Isabella stood motionless in the doorway, slowly processing what she had just heard. That's impossible, Leonard stammered. You never told me. If you were pregnant, I would have... You would have what? Camilla interrupted him, her voice gaining strength. You kept saying you didn't want children, that children were a burden, that they would hinder your career. When I found out I was pregnant, you had already gotten back with her. She pointed at Isabella. You were already engaged. What was I supposed to do? Destroy your happiness? Leonard sank heavily into the chair beside the bed, his hands covering his face. My God, Camilla, 4 years. He's 4 years old and I didn't know. He looks like you, Camilla continued, pulling her phone from her bag with difficulty because of her injuries. He has your eyes, your stubbornness. He's an amazing boy, Leo. Smart, funny, affectionate. She showed him a photo, and Leonard felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. The boy was his miniature copy. Dark hair, blue eyes, even the shape of his smile was identical to his own. Why now? He asked, his voice choked. Why are you telling me this now? Camilla closed her eyes, tears streaming down her bruised face. Because I'm sick, Leo. The doctors found a brain tumor. I need surgery, and I don't know if I'll be able to take care of Gabriel alone after this. It was then that Isabella spoke, her voice sharp as a blade. You two were together for 4 years after we separated. 4 years, Leonard, while you were married to me. No, Camilla and Leonard said at the same time. Isabella, it wasn't like that. Leonard stood up, trying to approach his wife. I haven't seen Camilla in 5 years. I didn't know about Gabriel. I swear to God I didn't know. And if you had known? Isabella asked, her green eyes shining with anger and pain. If she had told you back then, what would you have done? Left me to raise a child with her? Leonard didn't know how to answer because he didn't know. At 28, when it all happened, he really didn't want children. He really thought children would hinder his plans. Maybe he would have done exactly what Camilla feared, rejected the child. I don't know, he admitted, and saw the pain intensify in Isabella's eyes. At least you're honest, she said, picking up her bag. That explains why you ran away when Sophie was born. Fatherhood has always been a problem for you. Isa, wait. No, she cut him off. Sort this out. Get to know your son, understand what kind of father you want to be, and then look for me. Until then, I don't want to see you at home. Isabella, please. But she had already left, leaving Leonard alone with Camilla and the weight of the revelation that had just destroyed his last chance to save his marriage. In the days that followed, Leonard's life turned completely upside down. Camilla remained hospitalized for observation and preparation for surgery, and he found himself in the surreal situation of meeting a 4-year-old son he didn't know existed. Gabriel was exactly as Camilla had described, smart, funny, and eerily similar to Leonard as a child. The boy had grown up believing his father had died in an accident, and discovering he was alive created a mixture of complex emotions in the child. "Are you really my dad?" Gabriel asked the first time they met, in the park near the hospital where Camilla was hospitalized. "I am," Leonard replied, kneeling to be at the boy's height. "I'm so sorry I wasn't here sooner, Gabriel. If I had known—" "Mummy said you didn't want to have children," the boy said with the brutal honesty of children. "That's why she didn't tell you." The sentence cut Leonard more than any accusation from Isabella, because it was true. At 28, he really didn't want children. And now he had two, and he was failing as a father to both. He spent the week dividing his time between the hospital, where he followed the preparations for Camilla's surgery, and frustrated attempts to talk to Isabella, who wouldn't answer his calls. Sophie was staying with Isabella's mother, and he didn't even have the right to see his own daughter. The night before Camilla's surgery, she asked to speak with him alone. "If I don't make it," she began. "You will survive," he interrupted her. "Leo, let me speak. If I don't make it, Gabriel has no one else. My parents died when he was 2. I have no siblings. You're the only family he has." Leonard felt the weight of responsibility fall on his shoulders. A son he barely knew, an ex-girlfriend fighting a brain tumor, a wife who had kicked him out of the house, a daughter who was learning to live without him. "He's a special child, Leo. He deserves to have a present father, not just a provider. Learn from the mistakes you made with Sophie." The surgery lasted 8 hours. Leonard spent that time pacing the hospital corridors, persistently calling Isabella, who continued not to answer. When the doctor finally came out with a tired smile on his face, announcing that the surgery had been a success and that Camilla would make a full recovery, Leonard felt a relief he didn't know was possible. But at the same time, he knew his life had changed forever. Now he had Gabriel to care for, a 4-year-old boy he needed to get to know better, who needed a present and dedicated father. And he had Isabella, who would probably never forgive him for having hidden, even if unintentionally, the existence of another son. 2 weeks later, Leonard was sitting in the park, pushing Gabriel on the swing, when he received a call from Isabella. It was the first time she had called since the night at the hospital. "Isa? How's the boy?" she asked without preamble. "Gabriel, he's adapting. His mother's surgery was successful. She's going to make a full recovery. And you? How are you coping with all this?" Leonard stopped pushing the swing, surprised by the question. "I'm confused, scared, trying to understand how to be a father to 2 children when I've failed so much with both." There was a long pause before Isabella spoke again. "I want to meet him." "What?" "Gabriel. If he's going to be part of your life, he needs to be part of our decisions too. Sophie will gain an older brother. This affects me. It affects her." Leonard couldn't answer for a few seconds. Are you considering?" "I'm considering understanding the full situation before making any final decisions. Nothing more than that." "Isa." "Leonard," she interrupted him, "if you want any chance of rebuilding our family, you need to show me that you can be a father to Gabriel too. That you can be responsible, present, committed to both, because I won't accept half a father for Sophie." That night, Leonard looked at Gabriel sleeping in the guest room that had become the boys' room, and understood that his second chance wouldn't be just with Isabella and Sophie. It would be with a completely new family, more complex, with more responsibilities and more love than he had ever imagined possible. But he also understood that this would be his last opportunity. There would be no third chance, no more excuses, no more running away. It was time to decide what kind of man and what kind of father he wanted to be. The first meeting between Isabella and Gabriel took place on a Saturday afternoon at the apartment in Kensington Gardens. Leonard had spent the last week preparing for that moment, explaining to Gabriel who Isabella was, telling him about Sophie, trying to prepare the boy to meet Daddy's family. Gabriel arrived nervous, holding Leonard's hand tightly, carrying a small backpack with his favorite toys. At 4 years old, he was already observant enough to realize that this meeting was important. Camilla, who had been discharged from the hospital the day before, had talked at length with him about what it would be like to meet Daddy's new family. Isabella opened the door, wearing a simple navy blue dress, her hair tied back, a carefully neutral expression. Sophie was in her arms, curious about the presence of strangers. The 2 children looked at each other with that typical frankness of childhood, Gabriel shy but interested, Sophie hiding her face in her mother's shoulder, but peeking occasionally. "Gabriel, this is Isabella," Leonard said, his voice slightly tense. "And this little one is Sophie, your little sister." "She's very small," Gabriel observed, with the honesty of children. When will she be big like me? Isabella smiled for the first time since they arrived. It will take a little while. Sophie is only a year and a half old. You can teach her many things. They entered the apartment and Gabriel looked around with wide eyes. Wow, what a big house! Do you have an elevator just for you? Yes, Isabella replied. Do you want to see Sophie's room? She has lots of toys. The ice began to break when Gabriel saw Sophie's room. The boy was fascinated by the musical toys, and Sophie, seeing his attention, began to show him her favorite objects. Gradually, the two children began to interact, with Gabriel helping Sophie stack blocks and her laughing at the funny faces he made. Leonard and Isabella stood watching from the doorway, and for the first time in months there was something akin to peace between them. He's a sweet child, Isabella commented in a low voice. Does he look like you when you were little? I don't know, Leonard admitted. I don't have many memories of my childhood. My parents were always working. Isabella looked at him sideways. Is that why you also ran away, because your parents weren't present? Perhaps, Leonard sighed. I guess I never learned how to be a father because I never had an example. Gabriel did, she pointed out, watching the boy patiently explain to Sophie how a toy worked. Camilla did a good job raising him alone. The comment was a subtle jab, but Leonard understood the message. If Camilla could raise Gabriel alone, Isabella could also raise Sophie. He wasn't indispensable. They all had lunch together, and Gabriel proved to be a talkative and curious child. He talked about school, about his friends, about how he took care of his mother when she felt unwell. For a 4-year-old, he showed a premature maturity that broke Leonard's heart. Mummy gets tired sometimes, Gabriel explained to Isabella while eating. Then I make her tea and watch TV quietly. Leonard felt a lump in his throat. Gabriel had learned to care for a sick mother in the same way Sophie was learning to live without a father. Both children had developed a premature strength because of his absences. After lunch, while the children played in the living room, Isabella and Leonard talked in the kitchen. He's a special child, Isabella said, washing the dishes, but it's clear he grew up too fast. He had to be strong because Camilla needed him to be. Just like Sophie is having to be, Leonard completed. Exactly. Isabella turned to him. Leonard, I don't know if I can forgive what happened, but I'm willing to try one thing: family therapy. Therapy? For all of us. You, me, Sophie, and now Gabriel too. If we're going to try to form some kind of family, we need professional help, because it's not working with just goodwill. Leonard agreed immediately. In the following days, Isabella researched and found Dr. Marina Davies, a psychologist specializing in blended families. The first consultation was scheduled for the following Tuesday, for the adults only. Dr. Marina was a 50-year-old woman with graying hair, kind but piercing eyes. Her practice was located in Mayfair, decorated with soft colors and toys discreetly, scattered in the corners. I'll be direct, she said after Leonard and Isabella introduced themselves. You two are here for different reasons. Isabella, you want to determine if it's worth saving the marriage. Leonard, you want to be forgiven. But this won't work if you don't align your goals. Leonard shifted uncomfortably in the armchair. I want to win back my family. Which family? Dr. Marina asked. The family you had before you went to Edinburgh? Because that one no longer exists. Or the family you could build now, including Gabriel? Both. I want them all. Leonard, Isabella said, her voice tired. You can't want all the families. You need to decide which family you want to build and commit to it. In the sessions that followed, Dr. Marina peeled back the layers of problems surrounding the situation. Leonard had fled fatherhood not just out of immaturity, but out of fear. Fear of failing as a father in the same way he felt neglected by his own parents. Fear of losing his freedom, of not being able to be successful professionally and personally at the same time. Isabella had developed an ironclad independence to protect herself from disappointment. She had waited so long for Leonard to become present that she had ended up learning to live without him. And now, when he finally wanted to participate, she no longer knew if she needed or wanted that participation. Isabella, did you become a single mother by choice or by necessity? Dr. Marina asked in one of the sessions. By necessity. But I discovered that I'm good at it, that I can take care of Sophie alone. I can work. I can have an organized life. I don't need Leonard for anything practical. And emotionally? Isabella hesitated. Emotionally, it's more complicated. I still love him, but I don't trust him. And love without trust is... It's just feeling, Leonard completed, without a basis for a relationship. During this period, Gabriel began spending weekends at the apartment. Camilla, still recovering from surgery but with an excellent prognosis, supported the decision. She and Isabella even talked a few times, and to Leonard's surprise, they got along well. "She's a strong woman," Camilla told Leonard after meeting Isabella. "Sophie is lucky, and Gabriel too, if you two can make this work." "Aren't you jealous?" "Of what?" "Leonard, I got over you 5 years ago. I love Gabriel above all else, and I want him to have a present father. If that means he'll be part of your family, even better. He'll have sisters, he'll have a structure that I alone can't provide." "Sisters?" Camilla smiled. "Haven't you noticed yet? Isabella is pregnant, about 6 weeks." Leonard's world stopped. "How do you know?" "Woman's intuition and observation. She has that nauseous look, didn't drink wine at Sunday lunch, and is more sensitive than usual. You can bet on it." That night, Leonard arrived home determined to ask Isabella. He found her in the kitchen preparing a fruit smoothie for Sophie. "Isa, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Are you pregnant?" The spoon she was holding fell to the floor with a metallic clatter. Isabella turned slowly to him, her eyes wide. "How did you—" "Camilla suspected. Is it true?" Isabella sat heavily in one of the kitchen chairs. "I found out yesterday. I took the test 3 times to be sure." Leonard approached carefully, as if she were a startled animal. "How are you feeling?" "Confused. Scared. I don't know if it's the right time to have another child with everything that's going on. And about us. Does this change anything?" Isabella laughed, but there was no joy in the sound. "It changes everything, Leonard, because now I can no longer make decisions thinking only of myself and Sophie. If I leave you now, this child will grow up without a father from the very beginning. And if you don't leave me, if I don't leave you, I'll spend my entire pregnancy afraid you'll run away again when things get difficult." They talked late into the night, and for the first time in months it was a real conversation. Without accusations, without defenses, just 2 people trying to understand how to move forward. "Leonard, I want to believe you've changed, but I need guarantees." "What kind of guarantees?" "I need you to sell your share of the company." Leonard looked at her as if she had gone mad. "Isa, the company is my life. It's 15 years of work." "Exactly. And that's why it needs to be out of the equation. You can't be a father and an obsessive businessman at the same time. You've proven that twice already." "But how will we live? How will I support a family with 4 children?" "3 children," she corrected. "Gabriel has a mother. You won't support him alone. And as for how we'll live, with less luxury, but with more presence. You can work as a consultant, you can teach, you can do anything that doesn't require you to travel for 3 months straight." Leonard remained silent, processing the request. Selling the company meant giving up everything he had built, all the financial security he had. But it also meant giving up the excuse he had always used to be absent from his family. "And if I sell, does that guarantee it will work?" "It guarantees nothing," Isabella was honest. "But it guarantees that you are prioritizing family. And that's a start." The following week, Leonard scheduled a meeting with his partners. The initial offer was £17 million for his share of the company. It was less than it was worth, but it was enough to secure the family's financial future and still leave some for investments. When he told Gabriel and Sophie about the baby on the way, the reactions were opposite. Sophie, at 1.5 years, didn't understand very well, but Gabriel was euphoric. "Another brother. Or sister. I'll teach football if it's a boy, and I'll protect them if it's a girl." "And if it's a girl," Isabella asked, smiling, "then I'll teach football too. Girls can play football." Dr. Marina followed the entire process, and in the last sessions before the company sale, she made an important observation. "You two are trying to build a family under pressure. Isabella pregnant, Gabriel adapting, Sophie growing, Leonard changing careers. It's a lot all at once. And is that bad? Leonard asked. It's challenging, but it can also be transformative. You're being forced to make important decisions quickly, without time. For a second option, this can either accelerate the healing process or cause more problems. What do you recommend? Isabella wanted to know. Patience. With yourselves and with each other. No family rebuilds overnight, and you're not rebuilding. You're building something completely new. On the day the sale papers were signed, Leonard arrived home and found Isabella, Sophie, and Gabriel in the living room, putting a puzzle together on the floor. It was a simple domestic scene, but it made him stop at the doorway to observe. Sophie was sitting on Isabella's lap, trying to fit a piece. Gabriel was lying on his stomach, concentrating on his part of the puzzle. Isabella guided both of them with patience, smiling when they got it right. "Daddy!" Gabriel shouted when he saw him. "Come help! It's a 1,000-piece puzzle!" Leonard sat on the floor with them, and for the first time in his adult life, he spent 2 hours doing something that had no productive objective other than being with his family, and he discovered that this was exactly what he had been missing all these years. That night, after Gabriel went back home with Camilla and Sophie was asleep, Isabella and Leonard sat on the balcony with a cup of tea. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "About selling the company?" "Relieved," Leonard replied, surprised by his own answer. "Incredibly relieved." "Why?" "Because now I have no more excuses to run away. If I fail as a father and husband now, it will truly be due to incompetence, not lack of time." Isabella laughed softly. "At least you're honest." "Isa, I know we still have a lot of work ahead of us. I know trust will take time to return, but I want to really try this time." "I want to too," she admitted. "But if you run away again, Leonard, there won't be a third chance. Not for you, not for the children." "I know," he said, taking her hand for the first time in months, "and I won't run away anymore." Isabella looked at their intertwined hands, and for the first time since he had returned from Edinburgh, she didn't pull away from his touch. 6 months later, life in the penthouse in Kensington Gardens had completely transformed. What was once an impeccable and silent space now buzzed with life. Toys scattered across the living room, drawings on the refrigerator, laughter echoing through the hallways, and the constant noise of a real family. Isabella was 7 months pregnant, her belly already quite evident beneath the loose dresses she had adopted. This time, the pregnancy was different. Leonard was present for every doctor's appointment, every ultrasound, every change in her body. He massaged her aching back, rushed to buy the strange foods she craved in the middle of the night, and talked to her belly every night before bed. Gabriel now spent half the week at the apartment, dividing his time between Camilla's house and Daddy's house. Ifwai's adaptation had been surprisingly smooth. The boy blossomed with the paternal attention he had never had, and his relationship with Sophie had developed into a loving protection that melted the heart of anyone who saw it. Sophie, at 2 years old, had started talking more, and her first complete word after Mummy and Daddy was Gabby, her way of pronouncing her older brother's name. Gabriel took this responsibility very seriously, always making sure Sophie was okay, helping her eat, teaching her new words. Leonard had discovered that full-time fatherhood was more challenging and more rewarding than any deal he had ever closed. Waking up at 6 in the morning to help Sophie brush her teeth, preparing breakfast while Gabriel recounted the dream he'd had the night before, taking the children to the park on weekends, all of this had become not just routine, but a pleasure. Without the company to consume him, Leonard had discovered who he was beyond contracts and spreadsheets. He had started working as a consultant, choosing projects that interested him and didn't require long trips. He earned less money, but he had learned that time was worth more than any amount. Family therapy continued now, at a lower frequency, more for maintenance than for emergency. Dr. Marina followed the family's progress with professional satisfaction. "You achieved something rare," she said in one of the last sessions. "You transformed a crisis into an opportunity for growth. You didn't rebuild the family you had. You created a completely new and better family." It was a Saturday afternoon when Leonard found Isabella sitting in the nursery they were preparing. a box of old photos in her hands. She was crying, but she didn't seem sad. "What's wrong?" he asked, sitting beside her on the floor. "I was organizing Sophie's baby photos to make an album, and I found these." She showed him photos from Sophie's first few months. "You don't appear in any of them." Leonard took the photos and felt a pang in his chest. There was only Isabella and Sophie, alone in all the important moments. First smiles, first baths, first purees. He had lost everything. "But look at this one," Isabella said, picking up her phone and showing him a photo taken the previous week. It was Leonard teaching Gabriel to ride a bike with Sophie on his lap, laughing at the antics her brother was doing to impress their father. "This is our real family." That night, Leonard made a decision. He proposed to Isabella again. It wasn't a traditional proposal. They were in the kitchen, he washing dishes while she dried, when he simply said, "I want to marry you again." Isabella stopped drying the plate in her hands. "What do you mean?" "I want us to get married again. A new ceremony, with the children present, with Camilla present if she wants. I want it to be the wedding of the family we truly are now, not the family we pretended to be before." Leonard: "I know we're still in process. I know trust is still rebuilding. But I want to publicly commit, in front of our children, to be the man and father you all deserve." Isabella put the plate on the counter and turned to him. "And if I said no?" "Then I would keep trying every day until you felt you could trust me enough to say yes." The wedding took place 3 months later, in an intimate ceremony in the garden of the house they rented for the event. Isabella, 9 months pregnant, wore a simple champagne-colored dress. Leonard had chosen a navy blue suit, no tie, more relaxed than he had ever worn at formal events. Gabriel was the page boy, carrying the rings with the seriousness of someone taking responsibility very seriously. Sophie, as a flower girl, scattered petals along the path with more enthusiasm than technique, laughing and running after the petals that flew with the wind. Camilla was present, sitting in the front row, genuinely smiling. Her recovery had been complete, and she had developed an unexpected friendship with Isabella. "You two have a lot in common," Leonard had once observed. "Both are single mothers who raised children alone because of my irresponsibility." The vows they exchanged were not empty promises of eternal love, but concrete commitments of presence, patience, and priorities. "Isabella," Leonard said, holding her hands, "I promise to be present not only in happy moments, but especially in difficult ones. I promise that our family will always be my first priority, not the second or third. I promise to be the partner you deserve and the father our children need." "Leonard," Isabella replied, her voice choked but firm, "I promise to have patience with your process of learning to be a present father and husband. I promise to communicate my needs instead of expecting you to guess them. I promise to build this family together with you, not despite you." When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife again, Gabriel shouted, "Woo-hoo!" so loudly that everyone laughed, and Sophie clapped her hands without quite understanding what was happening, but happy with the celebration. The party was small, just close family, and a few intimate friends. Leonard danced with Isabella, carefully because of her belly, then with Sophie in his arms, and finally taught Gabriel some basic steps. "Now will you teach the baby when it's born?" Gabriel asked as he tried to follow his father's steps. "We will teach," Leonard corrected. "You, me, Sophie, and Mummy. We're a team now." Mary Elizabeth was born 2 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning, after a quick labor that caught everyone by surprise. Leonard was present this time. He held Isabella's hand through all the contractions, cut the umbilical cord, and was the first to hold his daughter in his arms. "Look at her," he whispered, his eyes filled with tears. "She's perfect." "And she's ours," Isabella said, exhausted but smiling. "Completely ours." Gabriel and Sophie met their little sister on the same day. Gabriel with the reverent care of someone who understands he is meeting someone very important. Sophie with the curiosity of a child who doesn't quite understand why everyone is making such a fuss over a little baby who only sleeps. In the first few days at home with Mary Elizabeth, Leonard experienced for the first time what it was like to care for a newborn. The sleepless nights, the constant feedings, the endless nappies. But this time, instead of running away, he plunged headfirst into the experience. "She's crying." "Again," Isabella murmured one early morning, still half asleep. "I'll get her," Leonard said, getting up before her. "You rest." He walked to the crib, picked up Mary Elizabeth and began to rock her. "Hi, my little princess. What's wrong? Are you hungry? Dirty nappy? Just want to chat?" The baby calmed down at his voice and he took her to the balcony, where he could see the city still sleeping below. "You know," he whispered to his daughter, "Daddy missed a lot with your older sisters. He missed Sophie's first steps, he missed 4 entire years of Gabriel. But I won't miss anything with you, I promise. I'll be here for everything." As if she understood, Mary Elizabeth opened her little eyes and looked directly at him. It was one of those moments Leonard knew he would remember forever. 6 months later, the house had found its rhythm. Gabriel divided his week between Camilla and them, but weekends were always spent as a complete family. Sophie had become a protective and sometimes jealous older sister of the attention Mary Elizabeth received. Leonard had learned to divide his attention equally among the 3 children, each with different needs and personalities. Isabella had returned to work, but now part-time, a negotiation she had managed with the Crown Prosecution Service. Leonard organized his consultancy around the children's schedules, refusing projects that required long trips or working weekends. "Don't you miss it?" Isabella asked one night as they tidied the kitchen after dinner. "The adrenaline of big deals, the status, the money?" Leonard stopped putting away the dishes and thought. "Do you know what I felt today? When Sophie managed to tie her shoelace by herself for the first time. When Gabriel called me from school just to tell me he got the highest grade in his math test. When Mary Elizabeth smiled when she saw me. That's real adrenaline. And when they grow up, when they don't need us as much anymore, then we will have built such a solid family that they will want to be close to us, even when they don't need to," Leonard replied. "That's what I want. I want our daughters to grow up knowing they can count on me always." One afternoon, almost a year after Mary Elizabeth's birth, Leonard was at the park with the 3 children. Gabriel pushed Sophie on the swing while Mary Elizabeth slept in her pram. It was an everyday scene, simple, but one that represented everything he had almost lost. His phone rang. It was an old partner, offering him the opportunity to participate in a project in Canada that could yield millions. 2 years ago, Leonard would have accepted immediately. "Thank you for the offer," he said, watching Gabriel teach Sophie to swing by herself. "But I'm not interested." "Leonard, it's a lot of money." "I'm sure. But I'm also sure I don't want to miss my daughter's childhood again." He hung up the phone and put it in his pocket. Sophie had managed to swing by herself for the first time and was shouting with joy. Gabriel celebrated as if it were a personal victory. Mary Elizabeth woke up to the noise and smiled at the commotion of her siblings. "Look, Daddy," Sophie shouted. "I did it myself." "You did, Princess. You're the bravest girl in the world." It was the same sentence Isabella had said in the video of her first steps, the sentence that had made him come home. Now he understood that courage wasn't just about taking the first steps. Courage was choosing to stay, even when it was difficult. Courage was prioritizing what truly mattered, even when it meant giving up other things. That night, after the children were asleep, Leonard and Isabella sat on the balcony, as they had done so many times in recent months. But now there was no tension in the air, no unspoken words, no fear of the future. "Do you regret it?" Isabella asked, leaning on his chest. "What?" "Changing so much, giving up the company, the status, the life you had before." Leonard thought about the question, looking at the city that stretched beyond the balcony. "No, because the life I had before was empty. It was just work and material achievements. It had no meaning. And now it does. Now I wake up every day knowing exactly why I'm alive. To be a father to these 3 incredible children, to be a husband to the strongest woman I know, to build a family that is an example of how love can overcome anything. Even when it's difficult?" "Especially when it's difficult," he replied. "Because it was in the difficult moments that I discovered who I truly wanted to be." Isabella smiled. That smile he had fallen. in love with years ago and which now meant even more. I love you, Leonard. The man you have become, not the man you were. I love you too. And I promise I'll never again give you reason to doubt that. From the children's room came the sound of Mary Elizabeth waking up. Automatically both got up to go to her, but Leonard was quicker. I'll go, he said. You rest. As he walked down the hallway, Leonard passed Gabriel's room, who was sleeping with an open book on his chest, and Sophie's room, who was sleeping cuddled with the teddy bear he had bought for her. 3 children, 3 personalities, 3 different but equally intense loves. He picked up Mary Elizabeth, who immediately stopped crying upon feeling his familiar scent. Hi, my little princess, he whispered. Daddy's here. Always will be here. And for the first time in his life, Leonard was absolutely certain that he was exactly where he should be, doing exactly what he should be doing, being exactly who he should be. He was no longer the successful businessman who shied away from responsibilities. He was a father, a husband, a partner, and he had discovered that this was the greatest success he could achieve. Mary Elizabeth looked at him with those curious little eyes, as if she could read his thoughts, and smiled. And Leonard knew that, from then on, all his decisions would be made thinking of that smile, and the smiles of her sisters, and the happiness of the family he almost destroyed but managed to rebuild. The man who once fled at the sound of a child's cry now found peace in the sounds of his family. And he discovered that there is no greater success than being awaited by those you love at the end of each day.